I know there's a lot of stories from truck drivers floating around the internet. I also know that a lot of these stories feature similar elements to each other, and some of those elements I've experienced myself. What I'm here to share, though, are some things that I've gone through on the road that I haven't seen regaled elsewhere. I've been driving for the last 9 years, and I've loved it since the moment I started my first job. I work independently, meaning that I bid for delivery contracts against other driving services, be they independent or companies. I'm not married and I have no kids, so driving around the country is ideal for me. Doing so independently allows me to pick and choose where I go and when. Driving alone at night on an empty road can get a bit unsettling, despite listening to movies, TV shows, and music all the while. It's the solidarity of driving for hours without seeing another living soul. That fact that if something were to happen, no one would be around to hear you scream that make the prospect a bit off-putting. Back in 2011, I was tasked with hauling a load from the distributor in Detroit, me, to Seattle, WA. And due to overnight construction on the interstate, I needed to take a road called Montana Highway 200. That road is the epitome of what I described earlier. Hours of driving without seeing another living soul. Due to my schedule, I found myself traversing this stretch of road around 11 p.m. I was wide awake though, so I decided to push on. I was about 130 miles east of the city of Great Falls, Mott, and I was watching one show or another, just kind of spacing out as I drove through the dark. All the electronics of the rig suddenly flickered. The laptop screen went black for a few quick moments, as did the headlights and the lights on the sides of the truck. After a few seconds, all was fine, though I was a bit perturbed, because the lights on the truck were the only lights around me. Without them, I couldn't see more than 20 feet in any direction. I continued driving for another few miles, and everything flickered a few more times. I came up over a hill and the headlights dimmed severely to the point I could only see a few feet past the front of the truck. As I reached the bottom of the hill, the lights suddenly surged. The brights were brighter than they'd ever been. The interior lights of the truck were on at 110 power. The orange lights on the side of the truck glowed brightly into the darkness that surrounded me. And with that, the truck shut off. I came rolling to a stop at the bottom of the hill and spent some time trying to fix the issue, ultimately finding myself unable to get the truck started back up. I pulled my phone out of my pocket, and of course I had no signal, with nothing in front of or behind me for 50 miles. And the fact that I hadn't seen another vehicle on this road since I got on it, I decided the only thing I could really do is try to get a signal on my phone to call AF. I grabbed a flashlight, got out of the truck, and began doing the ever-popular hold, your phone up in the air movie while I walked aimlessly in the dark. I think it was because I was so focused on the truck and my phone that I didn't realize how terrifying it was out there. The stars weren't very bright, and the moon was resting comfortably behind trees in the distance. Being at the bottom of a hill didn't help. I stayed close to the truck, but wandered around a bit, looking for any semblance of a signal. When I still couldn't get any, I shined my flashlight around a bit and saw a hill on the opposite side of the road. Just as I was going to go to the hill, I saw a light in the distance, the unmistakable glow of headlights. I breathed a sigh of relief, then looked down at my phone, then back up, and the lights were substantially closer than they just had been, much too close for a car to be driving. Then I blinked, and once again they were gone. But at that same moment, it was like the sounds of the world stopped. Cicadas in the distance ceased. Crickets went silent, and the sound of blowing wind evaporated, and with that it was completely, deafeningly, shatteringly. It was so quiet that it was disorienting. I leaned against the truck while I got my bearings, and then once again tried to find the lights that had been driving toward me, but I couldn't see them. I shined my flashlight around me, out into the distance, trying to find the hill I had wanted to climb to try to get signal on my phone, but I was taken aback when something else caught my eye. Door. Off the side of the road, maybe 15 yards out, there was a door. It was a door like anyone you'd find in a house. Intrigued, I walked over to it with a cautious reserve. It was in a frame and had a doorknob and everything. As I got closer, I felt an overwhelming wave of anxiety come over me. I wasn't scared necessarily, but rather nervous. I didn't know what was going on. I couldn't hear anything. A car may or may not have been heading in my direction, and there was a door standing in what was quite literally the middle of nowhere. It was just an overload of things I didn't understand. I reached the door and walked around it, and it was just that, a door standing free in the middle of a huge open field. Now that I was closer, I could see that there was a design in the door, flowers to be precise, painted in very light pastel colors. So light that even if it was the middle of the day, I wouldn't have been able to see them from where I'd first noticed the door. As I was inspecting it, my sense of hearing returned, and I was hit with a flood of noise. Like the lights that amplified a short time prior, the sounds blared like my head was inside a speaker. The sounds of crickets and cicadas nearly brought me to my knees before they returned to normal levels. I'd barely had a chance to collect myself when I saw movement near the front of the truck. I shined my light towards it, and for a split second, I saw a glimpse of what looked like a person moving from my line of vision to behind the truck. I yelled out to whoever it was with a generic "hey," and abandoned my interest in the door. I lightly jogged over to the truck, and with the same cautious reserve, I turned the corner to see who was by the truck. The same thing happened though, and as I turned the corner, so did whoever it was that was there, only at the other end of the truck, and I saw the same glimpse of a possible person now moving behind the trailer. Instead of chasing them the way they were going, I moved in the opposite direction and tried to meet them around the other side of the truck, but when I did, I saw no one. I couldn't hear any footsteps or anything. It was like I'd imagined someone there, only I knew I hadn't. I decided to look under the truck to see if I could see the feet of whoever it was. I crouched down, got as low as I needed to see underneath the trailer, and shined my flashlight. Of course, I saw no one. But at that moment, I felt eyes on me. The feeling was unmistakable. I'm sure you know the one I'm talking about. I slowly stood back up and shuddered when I was finally upright. I then felt a warm breath on my neck and quickly spun around only to find myself face to face with one. I still don't know what I was looking at. Their face was a blur, like it was vibrating almost, but not. I know that's a terrible description, but it's the only way I can think of to put it. If you've ever seen the show The Flash, think of Reverse Flash, but only their face. The only feature I could make out was actually a lack of a feature, where eyes would have been, though I wouldn't have been able to really see them properly. There was just solid black, like the sockets were hollow. They were wearing a suit, but it was like an amalgam of other suits. A patchwork array of different fabrics and monochromatic colors all sewn together, though it was all done very precisely, like you could actually go into a store and buy it. It wasn't sloppy in the least. Finally, on their head was a top hat, though a subtle one. It was a dark gray, almost gunmetal, and somehow it, as well as the rest of their body, was still. Only their face seemed to be out of focus. I was frozen in fear, once again consumed by the anxiety caused by the unknown and unfamiliar. I simply stood there face to face with this person for what seemed like an eternity, though in reality it couldn't have been more than 2, maybe 3 seconds. I then felt another warm breath on the back of my neck, which made me instinctively shudder and spin around, only there was no one behind me. Upon seeing this, I turned around once again to keep my eyes on. I was alone once again. The feeling of being watched was gone. I was standing next to the truck by myself, the normal sounds of the night surrounding me, and the crippling feeling of anxiety had dissipated. The orange lights on the side of the truck then flickered back on, as did the headlights. I cautiously walked around to the driver's side of the truck and climbed in, finding that when I'd gotten out of the truck, I had left the keys in the ignition, turned to the point that the electrics in the vehicle would be on. I closed the door and attempted to start the truck and was relieved when there was a rumbling, then the roar of the engine. I didn't think twice before putting it into gear and continuing down Montana Highway 200. There were so many aspects of that night that I didn't understand. I finished the job, and all the while I was trying to rationalize what had happened and why. It was also confusing, but it would not be the last time I encountered the same aspects of what happened that night. The person with the vibrating face, the sound and light surges, and that door. That flowery, pastel, freestanding door. I would see them again about 8 months later. It was a quiet Sunday evening when I got the call. I was just getting ready for bed when I heard the familiar ringtone blaring from my phone. It was from a no-caller ID. I sat there at the edge of the bed, phone to my ear. Hello? There was no reply. Just silence. I could faintly hear background noises at the other end of the line, though. After a long moment, a cool, business-like voice piped up. Good evening. Am I speaking to Alfred Lindgren? Yes, you are, I answered. Who's this? I'm calling from RSA Commerce. Are you still interested in the truck driver role? Those words chased the sleep out of my eyes. I quickly sat up straight. Yeah, I'm still interested, I said, trying to calm the urgent excitement in my voice. The 2008 recession was rough on everyone. Life was beating the shit out of me like I stole something. I had lost my car mechanic job and I was behind on my rent. Finding a job opportunity was like finding water in the desert. We would like to invite you for an interview. Would you be free tomorrow morning? The man over the phone asked. His voice was soft and silky smooth. So smooth it was almost unnerving. He sounded like one of those Asmir YouTubers. 8:30 a.m. to be exact. I'll be there. The interview was done over the phone. I sat at my dining room table, phone to my ear. They asked all the questions I expected. Why do you think you're a good fit for this company? Tell us about a time when you displayed initiative in your job. Why do you want to work for us? When the interview ended, the man handed me the job there and then. When can I expect to start? I asked. Next Monday, he answered. Be here at 6:30 sharp. The warehouse was a 45-minute drive from my apartment. Johnny Cash sang his heart out on the car radio as I sped through the highway on a foggy morning. The long road ran through the woods and I drove past miles and miles of tall birch trees that stretched up to the sky. All around me, there was nothing but forest. The Rasa Commerce warehouse was an old, empty building complex, tucked away in the middle of nowhere. It looked abandoned. I pulled up to the car park outside it. As I stepped out of my car, I couldn't help but notice the high level of security. There were lots of security guards roaming around the facility, patrolling the area. That should have sent the alarm bells ringing, but the man who interviewed me had explained that my job would involve delivering confidential, high-value goods. It made sense that they'd go balls out on the security. The top of the market pay was enough to stop me questioning. It'll only be a 3-week contract, the man on the phone had informed me. Our main driver is disposed at the moment. We just need a contractor to temporarily fill his place until we can find a permanent replacement in-house. The first day went as you'd expect. Me and my line manager had a short huddle meeting. Then, I was assigned my truck. I leaned against the hood of my car, smoking a cigarette while I waited for the box truck to be loaded. The job of loading trucks was only assigned to a select few. Once the truck was loaded, my supervisor moved it onto the road for me. He hopped out and handed me the keys before reminding me of his warnings, tattooing the words into my memory. Your job is simply to drive to the destination and drive back here. Nothing more, nothing less. He cleared his throat and spat onto the ground. Do not, at any point, attempt to open the back of the truck. What's in there is confidential. It'll be a 3-hour drive. Arrive before 10:30, we're on the dot. Not a second later. While the workers in the warehouse unload the back of the truck, stay in your seat and wait. Do not try to step out of the truck and help. Just stay in your seat and wait for the green light to leave. I was on the road by 7 The first job was a 200-mile drive to Detroit. I sipped some black coffee and listened to an 80s greatest hits playlist as I made my way from Muscat. The traffic wasn't too bad, so it was a smooth drive. When I arrived at the drop-off point, the workers signaled for me to reverse into a dimly lit warehouse. Just as I was instructed, I waited in the driver's seat as they unloaded the truck before giving me the green light to go. Then I made my way back to the Arce Commerce Depot. The only time I stopped was to fuel up or take a toilet break. My shift ended around 2 p.m. that day. The schedule remained the same on most days, with the odd graveyard shift here and there. Whenever I finished a drop-off, I'd go straight home. There was never more than one drop-off per day. I was making easy money and the hours weren't too bad. Everything was going well until I started hearing thuds from the back of my truck one night. I still remember that night like it was yesterday. It was 2 weeks into the job when my line manager called me to work my third graveyard shift. I was running late on my way to Flint, driving down a dark, quiet road when I started hearing thuds from the back of the truck. First, they were light, gentle thuds. Then they gradually got louder, more frantic, more desperate. Then I heard the faint, muffled sound of someone crying. Sudden realization washed over me, sending shivers up my spine. There was someone in the back of the truck. I felt my stomach twisting into knots. I pulled up to the breakdown lane and slowed the truck to a stop. Apart from the bright truck headlights, the road ahead was pitch black and empty. The biting cold wind rushed against me as I stepped out of the truck, my heart hammering in my chest. I made my way to the back and pulled up the 2 latches on the rear door and tugged the door open. I opened the door and was immediately assaulted by the pungent smell of urine. It made me gag. As soon as the door started opening, I could hear a faint beeping noise, probably a sensor. I raised my flashlight as I edged into the darkness. In the back of that truck, I found a huddle of people tied up on the floor, their wrists and ankles bound in ropes. Most of them seemed to be knocked out, but one of them, a woman, was awake. The image of her gaunt, pale face is forever etched into my memory. Her eyes widened when they met mine. "Please, whatever you do, just let my little girl go," she whispered through her tears. "She's only 12, please." I froze, paralyzed in fear as the realization sank into my heart. I had unknowingly taken part in a human trafficking ring. As luck would have it, a passing police car happened to pull up in the breakdown lane a couple minutes after my discovery. It was a freezing cold night, and the officers came to offer me a ride, adamant to not let me stay out there waiting for breakdown repair all night. The officers were friendly and jovial until they heard the crying from the back of the truck. It didn't look good for me. The police questioned me for a long time, asking the same questions over and over again. I told them the truth about what happened, that I was hired as a truck driver by a company called Arce Commerce, that I was assigned a 3-week contract and was only informed that I would be delivering confidential, high-value goods. I had no knowledge of any human trafficking operation whatsoever, but there was no official paperwork to confirm that I was ever employed by a company called Arce Commerce. As a matter of fact, there was no evidence that such a company ever existed, not on the job board I applied through, and not anywhere else on the internet. Commerce was a dummy corporation. All of my wages were paid by cash, so there were no wire transfers that the police could trace back to. The number I used to contact my employer didn't exist anymore. The truck I drove had a fake number plate and had been reported stolen. Its owner was 600 miles away in Iowa. The policemen had raided the Arce Commerce warehouse in the early hours of the following morning. There was no trace of anyone there, not a single soul. There was no one at the drop-off points either. It was almost as if they had all disappeared, vanished into thin air like ghosts. There was no evidence that I had been framed. There was, however, plenty of evidence that I was driving a stolen truck with a bunch of kidnapped people in the back. I was just a mule that they used to do their dirty work. And without anyone else to blame, the police pinned it on me. The police pinned it on me. The evidence wasn't concrete, but it was better for someone to be brought to justice than no one.
They needed someone to hang, someone to burn at the stake.
My life fell apart from that point onwards. I finished serving my 5-year sentence for kidnapping back in 2013. But the fact that I was falsely accused of a crime is not what haunts me today. What haunts me is the one question that lingers in the back of my mind. On that cold night, the police found 12 women and children who were lucky to survive. How many more were not as lucky? How many more people did I deliver to their deaths in the back of that truck? From a young age, I was told to never talk to strangers, and through my childhood, I never did. However, in adult life, things change. There is more reason to talk with people you don't know, especially when lonely. When I became a truck driver, the long and empty roads got the better of me, and I'd start giving lifts to hitchhikers who were going to the same place I was. It was the perfect solution for my loneliness, and often I would become friends with the people I gave lifts to. My job was absolutely perfect until that one November night. I had dropped off my cargo at the designated warehouse and was on my way back to the depot. It was going to be a long drive through the night. A few hours into the drive, I saw a man at the side of the road with a black bag and a plaque reading the exact same place I was going. Usually past a certain time, I would ignore it and continue my journey, but something about this man made me feel like I owed it to him, and I could do with some company on the journey anyway. I pulled over, opened my window, and asked him where he was going, even though I had already read the sign. He just pointed at his plaque and looked up at me. Something about him made me uneasy, but it was too late now, and I told him to hop in. This was a huge mistake. The man climbed in and sat in the passenger seat. He was dressed completely in black, with a silver chain spilling out of the top pocket of his overcoat. At first, I was hesitant. Then I got myself together and shook his hand. It was cold, very cold. Not the kind of cold when it has been chilly outside, but the kind when someone has a fever. A wet, clammy, unnatural cold. I looked at his face. He looked like he was in his late 50s, with a gray beard and harsh eyes that put you in your place. I cleared my throat and introduced myself. He sent back a rough mumble that didn't sound like a name. All I said was pleased to meet you and got back onto the road. I decided it best not to try and talk too much to the man unless he talked first. He didn't look like the kind of guy that you'd want to say the wrong thing to. After a couple of minutes, I began to notice how he was constantly rummaging inside the bag. It was making a rather unnerving clinking sound of metal hitting other metal. After around an hour of driving, the man had not stopped rummaging inside the bag. I had also noticed that he had been staring at me for some time, which was creeping me out massively. It really made my skin crawl. On most occasions, if I have a passenger who is not particularly communicative, I would put the radio on, but mine had stopped working last week, and I still needed to get it fixed. In an effort to stop him staring at me, I asked him what's in the bag. I immediately regretted it. He looked right at me and said in a raspy voice, "Mind your own business." I was slightly shocked by this and tried to pass it off as a bit of a sarcastic joke, although I knew for sure it wasn't. Throughout the journey, the rummaging got louder and louder, and he started making stranger noises in an extremely low tone. I was so unsettled I began thinking of what to do. I could not go another 3 hours with this man in my truck. He was now clanging whatever was in his bag very hard. He then stopped and started scraping what sounded like a knife against something else. I had enough and pulled into the side of the road. I didn't want to confront this guy, but I asked him once more, "What's in the bag?" Once again, he responded with, "Mind your own business." I nodded and said that we had a puncture on the back tire and asked him if he'd mind checking it out whilst I got the repair kit. He looked at me with a look of complete hatred, then got out of the truck and went round the back. I put my foot on the gas and drove. I saw him in my taillights stare after me with what looked like a smile spread across his face. His hands looked like they were covered in blood. I still see that image every time I close my eyes. I made it back to the depot, trying desperately to forget the man. Then I realized he had left his bag. Obviously, I could not help but look in it, but I wish I hadn't. The bag was full of different metal objects, all of them looking like some kind of torture device. From knives and shackles to ropes and bars, I then realized they were all covered in blood. I don't know why I didn't turn the bag in to the police, but I thought that because it had my fingerprints on, it would not end well for me. I took the bag home and did some more searching through it, and to my horror, at the bottom of the bag was a picture of my truck, a picture of the registration, and a picture of me holding the bag. I could hardly sleep, but in the end I managed to get a few hours. I definitely couldn't go to the police now. It looked like the bag belonged to me, but I decided that I had to. I put the bag in a box and was about to walk out of the door when I noticed something. The picture of me holding the bag was nailed into the door with a note attached. All it read was, "Mind your own business.